The morning I lost my job began with the sound of my own heartbeat, a stubborn little thud that kept insisting I was alive, even as another version of me, obedient, loyal 31 and careful, was quietly ushered into extinction. I'm a woman who has always colored inside the lines, who keeps receipts and answers emails at midnight, who shows up early and leaves only when the floors smell like lemon solvent and the city has gone soft and blue. 6 years at Harbor Point Communications taught me how to iron silk blouses in a hurry, how to seat jittery execs opposite clear glass so the skyline does some of the persuading, how to swallow the word deserve because it makes people uncomfortable. I'm Addison, and for a long time I believed that patience is a ladder. I did not realize it can also be a tether. You'd think betrayal arrives like a door slammed or a drink thrown. It doesn't. It arrives as a calendar invite at 8:59 a.m. with the subject line, "Quick touch base." Only the room is her office and her desk looks like a continent you're not allowed to step on. When she said she considered my job search disloyal, the syllables clinked like ice cubes, the kind that never melt in a tumbler because someone just keeps refilling it. I watched her mouth form the words and felt a strange drifting calm, the kind lifeguards must feel when they realize the person waving is not drowning at all, just trying to be seen. I'd asked for a raise 3 years in a row, brought data and polite smiles, wore my brightest dress so my worth might reflect off the conference table. I'd even pretended next quarter sounds like a promise and not a mirage. But that morning, the hallway between her office and the elevator stretched out like a runway, and as the security guard matched my steps, I thought, this is not the end, this is a takeoff. Even now, the sun that greeted me outside felt suspiciously warm, as if the city had been waiting for me to step out of that building so it could finally turn its face toward mine. I placed my cardboard box in the trunk, like a small casket goodbye to the succulent that never grew, the coffee mug with hairline cracks, that never leaked the framed thank you note from a client who wrote, "You listened." It's a rare skill. If you've ever had your email access cut while your hands were still warm from typing, then you know grief has a specific temperature. It is the heat of humiliation under a cool, professional smile. On the drive home, I replayed my 6-year-old origin story, the way you press a finger against a bruise to measure what hurts and what's just skin waking up. I was 25, an earnest newly minted from Washington State University with a marketing degree and an apartment that echoed when I laughed. I wore cheap heels and learned how to carry them like they were expensive. I learned client birthdays and the names of their children's Labradors. I learned when to speak and when to swallow a genius idea because the room only had room for one voice, and it wasn't mine. But I also learned that strategy is a form of kindness when it tells the truth gently and in time to change course. I learned my hunches could be right even when they were inconvenient. I learned I could save a crisis with a whiteboard marker and a better question. Those were the years I stretched. Those were the years my managers clapped for the team and said my name afterward like a footnote. There were raises I didn't get and compliments I did. The compliments were always phrased as if they were currency. "We value you. We appreciate you. You're a rock star." The problem with being paid in praise is that you can't put it toward your student loans. Still, I kept smoothing my skirt and showing up. There's a kind of loyalty that's noble. Then there's the kind that's just too tired to imagine another life. I told myself I was being noble, but I knew deep down I'd stayed because leaving meant admitting the love wasn't mutual. My phone buzzed after I carried the box to the kitchen and set it on the counter like an uninvited guest. It was my best friend Olivia, sharp-tongued, soft-hearted, whose laugh can turn a room into a lantern. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Are you okay?" It felt like a trick question. Was I okay? I was humiliated. I was furious. I was free. All of it thrummed beneath my skin, a messy orchestra warming up. I told her I was processing, which is a polite word for crying, and then making tea, and then sitting very still while the future rearranges itself behind your eyelids. She called my boss petty and small, and other words a good friend earns the right to say. I let the words wash over me like clean rain after a storm you didn't see coming. Later, another buzz. Another line thrown across the silence. North Bay Solutions. David's name lighting up my screen. David, who once thanked me for telling him what his brand needed before he could articulate it. Can you come in today? He asked, businesslike but not unkind. Let's talk. The fact of being wanted is a balm that works faster than any over-the-counter consolation. I looked at the box on the counter and thought, I will not unpack you. Not yet. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do with endings is refuse to make them comfortable. On the elevator ride to North Bay that afternoon, I caught my reflection in the smoked glass and almost didn't recognize her, the woman in the navy suit who had stopped apologizing for having ambition. My hair did what it always does in spring, half curl, half rebellion, and my lipstick was the color that acts like a small red flag to remind me speak clearly. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space where the light seemed to have its own ideas. Here, windows were not an afterthought. They were a philosophy. The receptionist smiled like she had been waiting for my name to match a face. David met me with a firm handshake and a welcome that didn't feel tactical. We spoke in a room where the table was round and no one sat at the head of it. I told the truth, which is to say, I didn't complain. I explained. I didn't dramatize. I detailed. I didn't posture. I placed credentials on the table like bread for the meal we might share. It wasn't an interview. It was a reckoning. He told me what they needed and what they were building. I told him what I could make possible and what I would refuse to compromise. It felt like catching sight of land after swimming too long in a circle. When he slid the offer letter toward me, there was a figure on it that made my throat tighten with a vindication so gentle it was almost grief. Grief for the years I'd spent being grateful for crumbs. Grief for the stories we tell ourselves that sound like patience when they're really fear. I asked for the night to consider. He nodded, not because he doubted the answer, but because he respected the ritual. Respect is an oxygen you don't realize you've been missing until the air stops burning your lungs. That evening, the sky over Spokane went indigo, and then velvet. On my balcony, the city hummed with its usual minor miracles. A dog announcing itself a siren, writing a brief red line across a corner. Someone laughing 3 floors down, as if the day had not conspired against anyone at all. I held the offer letter the way you hold a small sleeping animal with both hands, as if dropping it would hurt something living. I thought about the word disloyal, how easily it had been said, how carelessly it had been applied. The older I get, the more I understand that loyalty isn't proved by staying where you're starved. It's proved by staying true to yourself when you've been taught not to make a fuss. The next morning I walked back into Harbor Point as a visitor. There is no sensation quite like passing the front desk where your name used to be on the emergency contact list and signing it into a book for strangers. Jessica, the receptionist, gave me a quick conspiratorial smile, something in the way you recognize people who have watched you carry too many trays that weren't yours. I rode the elevator alone. The mirrored walls caught my face at unflattering angles, as if trying to convince me I should feel small. I didn't. In the conference room, I met a board member who asked careful questions and listened to the answers. It would have meant the world 3 years ago. That's the joke we keep playing on ourselves, that good timing is a moral achievement. It isn't. It's weather. You either get rained on or you don't. I explained what had happened, not to reopen the case, but to close it with dignity. I said respect out loud, and the word didn't tremble. If this were a movie, this is the scene where I give a monologue that slices clean and the music rises and someone claps in slow motion. Real life is quieter. There was no applause. There was a handshake and an acknowledgement, a thank you for your candor, that tasted like a door finally shutting with the right kind of click. I walked out lighter. Not triumphant, not vindicated, just lighter, the way you feel after setting a heavy thing down where it belongs. And yet, because the world has a strange sense of choreography, there are consequences that arrive on tiptoe, wearing the shoes of fate. The client I had shepherded for years, the account that kept me up and made me proud, would soon sit with a group of executives and evaluate whether Harbor Point still served them well. I did not throw gasoline. I did not even bring matches. I simply recused myself and watched the ledger balance itself. Sometimes karma is not thunder. It is accounting. Quiet, precise, inevitable. The exactness of that thought didn't thrill me the way I once imagined revenge might. It calmed me, like returning a book to the library after keeping it too long and seeing the shelf make room for it again. At home again, I opened my closet and touched the outfits that had kept me presentable through reputational weather. I pulled out the black dress I saved for presentations that needed a little gravity, and the cream blouse that forgives coffee shakes. I thought about all the ways women learn to dress our competence so it doesn't make anyone nervous. I thought about my mother's hands teaching me to tack a loose hem. Beauty is what holds, she said. I didn't understand then that she meant integrity. I do now. The older I get, the more I want a life that doesn't require me to staple my worth to a smiling face. On Monday, I would start anew. But first, I stood in my small kitchen and looked at the cardboard box on the counter. I took out the framed note. You listened and propped it against the backsplash. It's easy to think our value is a speech we give. Often it's a question we ask and the silence in which we wait for the truth to come out of hiding. My worth is not a trophy. It's the work. It's the way I know how to stand in a room full of noise and hear the one thing that will move us forward. Here's a confession I used to fantasize about: dramatic revenge. A perfectly timed resignation delivered during a quarterly meeting. A client pulled away like a tablecloth under expensive china, with not a single plate broken. I thought satisfaction was spectacle. But in the end, the most exquisite retribution I found was untheatrical and adult. I told the truth. I chose myself. I let the consequences do their quiet work. It turns out that's the kind of ending that doesn't end you. It's the kind that opens a door you didn't know you were allowed to knock on. The first Monday of my new life began before dawn. I woke without an alarm, the kind of waking that comes not from rest, but from readiness. The air was cool, nervous, almost trembling. I stood in front of my wardrobe staring at the rows of clothes that once represented compliance. Every shade of beige and navy felt like a souvenir from a version of myself that apologized for taking up space. I chose a crimson blouse that morning, not because it matched my mood, but because it didn't. It reminded me that I could choose color even after being told to blend in. At North Bay Solutions, the lobby smelled like new beginnings: coffee, ambition, fresh paint. There was light everywhere, real unfiltered light. Not the humming fluorescent kind that makes you forget what time it is. David met me at the door with a smile that wasn't managerial but human. "Welcome home," he said. And I almost laughed at the word. Home. Could work feel like that? My office wasn't grand, but it was mine. A window overlooking the Spokane skyline, a door that actually closed a desk large enough for both a laptop and a dream. The small details startled me: the personalized nameplate, the basket of welcome gifts, the handwritten note. "We're so glad you're here." I hadn't realized how starved I'd been for something as simple as acknowledgement. When David introduced me to my team, 5 faces looked up with curiosity and warmth. They weren't guarded the way people at Harbor Point used to be, measuring every word for hierarchy. Here conversation moved easily. Ideas were currency, not threats. For the first time in years, I spoke without rehearsing my tone. The sound of my own confidence startled me. It had been hibernating. We dove into the morning's briefing, a review of active accounts and pending partnerships. My job title, Director of Client Strategy, still felt surreal in my mouth. Not because I doubted I'd earned it, but because it symbolized something deeper: permission to lead without shrinking. I was being trusted with decisions, not micromanaged with doubts. By midday, as sunlight shifted across my desk, David asked me to join him in the main conference room. Inside were faces I'd only seen in polished newsletters: North Bay's executive team. The CFO, the CMO, the VP of Communications, all gathered around a sleek glass table. I sat hands folded, pretending my pulse wasn't audible. "Addison," the CMO began, "we wanted your perspective on something significant." I listened as they explained. Harbor Point's contract, the one I'd nurtured for 6 years, was up for renewal next month. They were reconsidering. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the irony of it all. My old company, the one that dismissed me as disloyal, was now at the mercy of the client I had built from the ground up. I could have used that moment to settle a score. A few cutting words, a subtle nudge, and Harbor Point would have been history. But revenge, I'd learned, is a shallow fuel. It burns fast and leaves smoke where you should be breathing. I think you should evaluate Harbor Point the same way you would any partner, I said carefully. Their work is competent, but consistency has been slipping. I'd suggest comparing proposals on creativity, communication, and reliability. David studied me for a long moment. There was quiet approval in his eyes. Professional as always, he said simply. When the meeting ended, I walked back to my office feeling both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I'd stayed true to myself, heavier because I knew what the eventual decision would be. Sometimes you don't need to push karma. It already knows the way. 2 days later, the inevitable email went out. North Bay was transitioning its account to another agency, Meridian Creative. The wording was polite, diplomatic, corporate. But I knew what it meant. I'd just watched Harbor Point lose nearly a third of its annual revenue. I hadn't lifted a finger. I hadn't needed to. The truth had done the work for me. When David showed me the email before sending it, I read it twice, making sure there was no malice between the lines. There wasn't. Just facts. That's the thing about justice, it doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it's an email at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. I imagined Victoria in her glass office reading the message, the way her fingers would tense on the mouse, the faint crack in her perfect composure. Maybe she'd call an emergency meeting. Maybe she'd spin it as a strategic shift. But she would know. Deep down, she would know. The loyalty she punished was the loyalty that had held her empire together. That night, I received a message from Jessica, the receptionist, who'd whispered encouragement to me on my last day. "The office is chaos," she wrote. "Victoria's been in meetings all day. 3 people have already updated their resumes. Karma works fast." I smiled but didn't reply. It wasn't my victory to celebrate. My win was quieter, steadier. It was waking up each morning knowing I'd chosen self-respect over resentment. Still, I'd be lying if I said I didn't pour a small glass of wine and raise it to the air that evening. Not to toast revenge, but closure. There's a sweetness in watching balance restore itself not through cruelty, but through consequence. Over the following weeks, my new job became more than work. It became restoration. I rediscovered the part of me that used to brainstorm past midnight just for the thrill of an idea coming alive. My team grew under my leadership, and with them, my confidence. I began mentoring younger women in the company the way I'd once wished someone had mentored me. One of them, a bright analyst named Nina, asked me over coffee, "How did you know when it was time to leave your last job?" I thought about the cardboard box, the humiliation, the sting of betrayal, but also the sunrise that greeted me after. When I realized staying was hurting more than leaving ever could, I said. She nodded slowly, her eyes soft with understanding. Sometimes people think revenge is the point of stories like mine, but that's not it. The real story is reclamation. It's about the moment you stop waiting to be valued and start acting like you already are. 1 year later, as I stood in my office looking out over the city, an email popped up. Harbor Point Communications has filed for restructuring, a polite corporate phrase for collapse. I didn't feel joy. I felt something better, peace. I closed the email, turned off my monitor, and looked at the framed note from years ago. "You listened." Yes, I did. To clients, to intuition, to the quiet voice that kept saying you deserve more. And this time I listened all the way home. If you've ever been underestimated, undervalued, or called disloyal for choosing yourself, remember this. Sometimes the door that closes is just redirecting you to the one that leads to freedom. If my story resonated with you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach others who need to hear them. And if you've ever walked away from something that didn't see your worth, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your story too.